Hi everyone, this presentation is about quotes. As you can see here, I'm going to talk about what a quote is and how it's different from a paraphrase, as well as how to format your quotes. This presentation is all in MLA format, so if your teachers want you to use APA, I would just Google it. They're similar, but there are some differences, especially in what comes after the quote. So Google it if you need to use APA. This presentation is just about MLA. Okay, so first, what is a quote? Say someone says, "I'm enjoying my lunch," and you want to say that that person said that. It's not that hard. You just put quotes around it, and you put the person saying it in front. That person says, comma, quote, "I'm enjoying my lunch," right? Notice that "I'm enjoying my lunch" is exactly what he said. Okay, I didn't change any of the words. Okay, so when you're making a direct quote, that means you're using exactly the same words, and that's what these quotation marks mean. Those mean exactly these words in exactly this order, and this punctuation too. Before the quote, you saw I had the person, in this case it was he, then a verb, and then a comma. The verb was a special kind of verb, and we'll talk about that in a minute. So if there was an exclamation point, right, or a question mark or a comma, those all go inside the quotation marks. But the period, if there's a period, would go outside. And we'll see some examples of that later too. So, for example, Smith explains, comma, "I'm enjoying my lunch." And that's it, right? So Smith is the person, then a verb, in this case explains, and then a comma, then quotes, "I'm enjoying my lunch," and that's exactly Smith's words. Okay. So to put it, to illustrate the different parts a little more clearly, there's the source or the author, right? There's a quotative verb, and there are many quotative verbs. I said these were special kinds of verbs. Basically, if you Google the phrase quotative verb, you'll find a lot of examples of these. These are just a few. So states, defines, claims, points out, replies, explains, as you see here, and then the comma, right? And then the exact quote. And then after the quote, I need to, in some cases, put a citation in parentheses, which are these things. In most cases, it's going to be the author's name and the page number. If you're reading a book or an article and that's what the quote is from, then you put the author's name and the page number. If it's something like a YouTube video, you put just the author's name because there are no page numbers on YouTube. And then, of course, if you put the author's name before the quote, you don't have to put it again after the quote. So in this case, I put Smith before, so I don't have to put Smith after. Okay, so let's do a little bit of practice. Let's say we're reading a book called The Ghost, and the author is Mandy Kim. And on page 23, it says this. On page 24, it says this. And let's say I want to quote them. You can pause if you want to try it yourself before you see the answers. It might look like this. Mandy Kim says, comma, quote, and then exactly what page 24 said. And then after the quote, I have 24, which is the page number, and then period. So I said period, comes outside the quote. Only question mark and exclamation point and all kinds of commas and other things go inside the quote, but period would come after. Okay. The second one, she says, so this time I'm not saying the author's name first. She says, and then the quote, and exactly that person's words, and then afterward, Kim 24. And I have to say the author's name this time because I didn't say it before the quote. So Kim's the author's last name, and then 24 is the page number. Is that the right page? Yes, okay. So that's important to get the right page. Okay, so there are a few cases where you can change the words inside the quote. In general, when you see quotation marks, everything between those quotation marks is exactly what the author said, except you can change words if you use square brackets, right? Not parentheses, but square brackets. And you can use ... for parts you cut out. Okay, sorry. Square brackets are for changing words. ... are for taking words out. Okay. And then the last thing about format is if the quote has a quote inside of it, you change the double quotes to single quotes. Okay. That's the only change you make to punctuation inside the quote. Okay. So to give another example, let's say these are pages 25 and 26 of the same book. So The Ghost by Mandy Kim. Page 25, page 26. So if I want to change or delete something from inside the quote, it might look like this. The author explains, comma, quote, when it noticed me, comma, ... it smiled. And again, I have to put Kim 25 in parentheses after. Kim's the author. Second example, Mandy describes, comma, quote, it whispered in a square bracket, scary voice, your home. Okay, so in the first example, the ... means I just took something out. And in the second example, the square brackets means I changed something and I changed it to scary voice. So if you're reading this quote, you know scary voice are my words, not the author's words. Okay, and notice also your home. That quote that was in the book is now in single quotes. And that means at the very end of the quote, I have a single quote and then a double quote because the single quote is the last part of that sentence. And again, author's name and 26 for the page number. So to illustrate again, these are the changes that I made. I took out some part and I replaced it with ... in the first case. In the second case, I took something out and replaced it with a different set of words. Okay. So in both cases, I have to show to the reader that I changed something, and that's what ... and the square brackets are for. Okay. So those are quotes. There's also a way of using an author's ideas called paraphrasing. Paraphrasing means you're not using the author's words, but you are using the author's ideas. And still, you need to cite in this case. Cite means in the parentheses you put the author and the page number for information that comes from someone else. And you need to cite any kind of knowledge that's not common knowledge. So if you learned that the biggest city in Utah is Salt Lake City, and you think not everybody knows that, you have to say where you heard that from, where you learned that from. Even if it's just Wikipedia, that's better than nothing. Okay? And if you're paraphrasing, that means you're using the idea, but you're not using Wikipedia's words in this case. So you're not quoting Wikipedia. You're just taking an idea that Wikipedia had and you're putting it in your own words. So you change all of the words, but you don't change the ideas. And that's a paraphrase. So going back to our first example, when Bob said, I enjoy the food, or I'm enjoying the food, you can paraphrase by saying Bob indicates that he likes the food, and I didn't keep the words, but I kept the same idea. And in this case, I still have to cite where I got that information from. Okay, so a lot of students wonder about the difference between common knowledge and not common knowledge. And like I said in the last slide, if it's not common knowledge, then you need to tell where you got that information from. So which of these do you think need citations? Which of these are not common knowledge? And if they're not common knowledge, then you need to cite. The United States has 50 states. I think that is common knowledge. I think everybody knows that about the United States. I don't need to cite that. Okay? But if it's something very specific about a particular state, like California is the 6th largest economy in the world, or California has the 6th largest economy in the world. Most people don't know that, so I should cite it if I use that information in a paper or on a test or something. Okay, so I would need to put in parentheses some author's name who told me that. Okay, Guangzhou is in southern China. I think most people know that. I don't think I need to cite that. Guangzhou has a large active port. Now we're getting pretty specific about Guangzhou, and I didn't know that until I actually did read this on Wikipedia. So I should cite that. I should put in parentheses. In this case, Wikipedia contributors. About half of Guangzhou's population speaks Mandarin. Again, that's really specific about Guangzhou, and I don't think most people know that. So I do need to cite that. Okay. So I hope that's made clear a little bit for you the difference between a quote and a paraphrase, and specifically how you should quote things.